Enjoy your meal, sweetie. That was the familiar note Helen, the head chef in her 40s at the small family restaurant Rosemary's Table, always left behind. No matter how hectic her workday got, Helen always made time to prepare an extra small meal, usually a warm sandwich and a carton of milk, and place it in a brown paper bag behind the restaurant. The food came from her own daily portion. The recipient of this quiet gift was Evan. When Helen first met him, he was only 7, a small, gaunt boy with a mop of curly hair and hands chapped from the cold. She never pried, nor did she ever set any conditions. "I don't need to know why," she once told a grumbling manager. "I just need to know that no child should have to go to bed hungry." That was Helen, an ordinary woman with an extraordinary heart. Once, she asked him, "Where do you live, sweetie?" Evan just shook his head. "What about your mom?" He was silent for a long moment, then whispered, his voice like the wind slipping through a crack. "My mom passed away when I was 5. After his mother's death, Evan was sent to an orphanage, a place he would later recall had more beatings than hugs. He ran away. His life from then on was a grey fog, wandering through parks, sometimes sleeping beside homeless men, other times huddled in an old cardboard box under the awning of a closed pharmacy. That fog only began to lift when Helen appeared. She didn't ask questions or flinch at his grimy appearance. Instead, she started an unwavering routine. Twice a day, at noon and in the evening, a meal would be waiting at the back door, accompanied by a small note with the words, "Enjoy your meal, sweetie. Don't be afraid." To Evan, Helen was more than just a kind person. She was the reason he believed the world hadn't completely turned its back on him. Helen never told anyone about the boy. She didn't post about it, didn't mention it to her co-workers, and never asked her manager for permission. To Helen, this wasn't an act of charity to be celebrated by others. It was simply instinct, as natural as breathing. Every afternoon, while preparing meals for customers, she would quietly pack an extra sandwich with a little more meat, an extra slice of cheese, and a small carton of milk. Every evening, even on the busiest nights, she would find a moment to pack a warm dinner. Sometimes it was honey-glazed chicken, other times just toasted bread with vegetable soup, and always tucked inside was a small, handwritten note in her signature slanted script. "I had an extra egg today. Make sure you eat it all, sweetie." Or, "They say it's going to rain tonight. Find a dry place to sleep, okay?" Evan grew up on those notes. Every word, every fold in the brown paper bag was cherished and saved like a sacred relic. He never lingered, just ate in silence and then vanished. But the notes were always carefully folded and tucked into his pocket. Her kindness was completely unconditional, but it wasn't always understood. It stirred judgmental whispers in the kitchen, chatter that found its way to her. "She's feeding a stray. He's just going to get used to handouts. A dirty kid like that, loitering by the back door. It's bad for business if a customer sees him." The pressure came to a head when the manager pulled her aside with a blunt warning. "You could be fired for giving away food like this. This is a restaurant, not a soup kitchen." In the face of his words, Helen simply bowed her head, murmured an apology, and then did the exact same thing the next day. What kind of person, she thought to herself, could see a hungry child and just walk away? And so, it went for 10 long years. The world could change, time could fade everything else, but in that small space behind the restaurant, the scene remained the same. Helen, a paper bag, a gentle note, and a boy. Until one day, that constancy was broken. The boy didn't come. In his usual spot, he left behind a single, carefully folded note. "I need to go find a job now, Miss Helen. I'll try my best, just like you always did for me." From then on, the back door returned to its usual stillness. The boy was gone, and the brown paper bag never appeared in its familiar corner again. But what Helen saw as an ending, for Evan, was a beginning. The decision to leave hadn't come suddenly. It had been stirring for months. sparked when Evan caught his reflection in the glass of a closed storefront. He was no longer the skinny kid, shivering in the cold. Staring back at him was a 17-year-old young man whose shoulders were beginning to broaden and whose eyes no longer held a look of fear. He realized that each sandwich, each carton of milk, was no longer a salvation but was beginning to feel like the weight of his gratitude. He owed Helen not just for 10 years of food, but for a lifetime, and he understood that the greatest gift he could give her wasn't a simple thank you, but to become someone who no longer needed those secret meals. Her kindness had given him strength, and now it was time to use that strength to stand on his own 2 feet. That night, under the dim glow of a street light, he used the cleanest napkin he could find to write that promise. Every letter was an oath. That oath guided his steps, leading him away from the familiar corner of the alley and into a world of grease, metal, and relentless effort. A week later, hundreds of miles away in a dusty industrial park, Evan stood before a burly man with a goatee and grease-stained hands. His name was Henderson, the owner of a rundown auto repair shop. "What do you know about engines?" Henderson growled, his eyes sizing Evan up from head to toe. "Not much," Evan replied, his voice quiet but steady. "But I'm a fast learner," Henderson scoffed. "Learn. We work here, kid. We don't study. Sweep the floor. If you can handle that, we'll see." And Evan swept. He swept until you could see the hairline cracks in the concrete floor. He sorted the jumbled mess of tools, putting each one back in its place. He worked in silence, without a single complaint. Henderson watched, and for the first time in a long time, he saw something different in the kid. On cold winter nights, when exhaustion and loneliness gnawed at him, Evan would pull out an old tin box from his pocket. Inside wasn't money, but a far more precious treasure, Helen's notes, creased and worn, but kept perfectly flat. He would reread her slanted script. "I had an extra egg today. Make sure you eat it all, sweetie." Or, "Find a dry place to sleep, okay?" Those notes weren't just memories, they were his compass. They reminded him that kindness existed and that hard work was how he could become worthy of it. "Miss Helen never gave up on me," he would tell himself. "I can't give up either." Years passed. From the boy who swept the floors, Evan became Henderson's best mechanic. He saved every penny, and eventually he opened his own small garage, simply named Evan's Garage. One day, a woman with a worried expression pulled her old car into the shop. After inspecting it, Evan said, "Ma'am, your car needs new brakes and an oil filter. The total will be..." He paused when he saw the woman clutch her purse tightly. I really can't afford both right now," she stammered. "Can you just do the brakes? They're more important." Evan looked at her for a moment. Then a rare, warm smile broke across his face. "It's all right. The filter's on me. Just consider it a gift from an old friend of mine. Safety first." Good news travels fast. Word spread about the young garage owner, who not only had a master's touch, but also a heart of gold. From one small shop, Evan's Garage grew into a reputable chain across the city. Evan had become a successful businessman, a man who had everything. Yet he knew the greatest debt of his life remained unpaid. 15 years after the day he walked away, a sleek, black luxury sedan silently pulled up to the corner across the street from where Rosemary's Table used to be. The door opened, and a man in a sharp, tailored suit stepped out. It was Evan. The shy, gaunt boy of the past was completely gone, replaced by the confident poise of a successful entrepreneur. But deep in his eyes, there was a flicker of anticipation and nervousness that no one else could see. His heart pounded. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times. He would walk in and find Miss Helen. She would be much older, her hair perhaps completely white, but he was certain he would recognize that warm smile and those kind eyes. He would say, "Miss Helen, it's me, Evan," and he would give her a gift. Not as repayment for that kindness was immeasurable, but to show her that the seed of kindness she had planted all those years ago had now blossomed into a garden. But as he looked up, the smile vanished from his face. The rustic wooden sign for Rosemary's Table was gone. In its place was a cold, modern name, the Urban Bistro, in a gleaming metallic font. A sense of unease crept over him. Evan took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The space inside was completely unrecognizable. The cozy wooden tables had been replaced with sleek, minimalist furniture. The air no longer smelled of familiar chicken stew, but of coffee and expensive perfume. A young manager in a crisp uniform approached. "Welcome, sir. How may I help you?" "Excuse me," Evan said, his voice a little hoarse. "I'm looking for someone. Her name is Helen. She used to be the head chef here." The manager furrowed his brow, a look of confusion on his face. "Helen? I'm sorry. We don't have any employees by that name." "No, I mean, before," Evan tried to explain. "A long time ago, when this place was still Rosemary's Table." "Ah," the manager exclaimed, as if recalling some ancient folklore. "The old head chef. That was a long time ago, sir, before my corporation took over." "So, she retired?" Evan asked, a fragile sliver of hope still flickering within him. The manager gave a faint, professional smile that lacked any warmth. "Not exactly. When our corporation took over, we needed a complete overhaul, modernize the menu, the style. She was, to be frank, a bit outdated." The word outdated struck Evan like a knife to the heart. The manager continued, his voice as monotone as a machine. "She was let go many years ago. As for where she went, we really wouldn't know. No one kept in touch." Evan felt his chest tighten. He managed to choke out a thank you and stumbled out of the restaurant. The midday sun was bright, but the world before him had suddenly turned grey. He leaned against his luxury car, the very symbol of the success he had worked his entire life to achieve, but now it felt meaningless. He had all the money in the world, yet he couldn't find the one person he wanted to repay. On pure instinct, Evan walked around to the alley behind the building. It had changed too. It was clean, empty, and cold. No more old dumpsters, no more lingering smell of food. The place where the boy named Evan had been given life was now just a soulless void. He stood there, staring into the emptiness, as disappointment and rage surged within him. Outdated, he gritted his teeth. They called her kindness outdated. It was in that moment of despair that an idea ignited in his mind. Powerful, clear. He couldn't find Helen, but he could find her legacy. He could prove to the world that her kindness was never, ever outdated. He lifted his head, his gaze fixed on the Urban Bistro sign with an ironclad determination. If he couldn't find Helen, he would bring Helen back to this place himself. Evan pulled out his expensive phone and dialed a familiar number. His voice rang out, sharp and without a hint of hesitation. "Hello, Mark. It's Evan. Find me the owner of the building that houses the Urban Bistro. Whatever the cost, I'm buying it." The person on the other end, his lawyer, sounded surprised. "Evan, that's a prime location. The price will be astronomical. Are you sure? The restaurant business isn't your expertise." "I'm not buying it to run a business," Evan replied, his gaze locked on the cold sign ahead. The negotiation was quicker and more expensive than he had imagined. The corporation that owned the building didn't want to sell, but Evan put a number on the table they couldn't refuse. He poured nearly the entire fortune he had painstakingly built over 15 years into it. His friends and partners all said he was crazy, but they didn't understand. For him, this wasn't a financial transaction. It was a pilgrimage back to the source of the kindness that had saved his life. The day the Urban Bistro sign was taken down, Evan stood there, arms crossed, watching in silence. He wasn't reminiscing about the past. He was rebuilding it. "Gut it all," he told the construction supervisor, his voice low and resolute. "I want it to feel warm. I want this place to feel like a home." And a home was built. The floors were laid with oak that creaked softly and familiarly underfoot. Rustic tables and chairs replaced the flashy furniture. But there was one special, sacred place, the corner of the kitchen where Helen had once stood. It was preserved exactly as it was, clean and gleaming, but always kept empty. Evan placed a small brass plaque there. No one was allowed to touch it. Curious customers would often lean in to read the elegantly engraved words, "Dedicated to Helen, the greatest chef." A few weeks later, the restaurant officially reopened. A new oak sign, with lettering Evan himself had carefully painted in white, hung solemnly above the entrance, Helen's Table. On opening day, there were no red ribbons, no champagne, no speeches. Evan simply threw the doors open at noon. The aroma of honey-glazed chicken and hot vegetable soup wafted out onto the sidewalk, a silent invitation. The homeless, the lonely elderly, and the stray children watched from a distance, hesitant. They couldn't believe it. How could a place this nice be for them? A young boy, as gaunt and grimy as Evan had once been, mustered the courage to approach. He pointed at the trays laden with food and whispered, "Sir, is this really free?" Evan, dressed in a crisp white apron, came out. He didn't stand tall, but knelt down to meet the boy's gaze at eye level. He smiled, a smile he had been saving for 15 years, and said, his voice warm and clear, "Yes, it is. Come on in. Eat your fill. Don't be afraid." In that moment, the circle was complete. The words that had once saved his life were now his to give. Helen's Table quickly became a magical place. Every day, hundreds of free meals were served. Evan didn't care about profit. He told his staff, whom he hired for their kind hearts, not their experience, "Our profit isn't in the cash register. It's in the empty plates and the full smiles." That is Helen's legacy. He hadn't found her, but he had turned her name into a beacon of kindness. He lit it every day, hoping that its light might one day guide his benefactor home. An act of kindness, no matter how quiet, has its own ripple effect. The story of Helen's Table began to get noticed. At first, it was just whispers among the neighborhood locals, then a blog post by a young woman who had stumbled upon the place. She wrote, "I saw a miracle today. A beautiful restaurant that doesn't sell food, but serves dignity. Its owner, a successful businessman named Evan, told me he was just paying back a debt to a woman named Helen, who saved him with meals in brown paper bags. He doesn't know where she is, but he built this restaurant to honor her kindness." That post, titled "Helen's Table, A Millionaire's Debt of Kindness," went viral. It was shared tens of thousands of times. Television stations came calling. The story of Evan and his mysterious benefactor became a heartwarming inspiration for the entire city. Far away, in a small, quiet apartment, an elderly woman was living a simple life. It was Helen. Her hair was now white as snow, and her hands were etched with the deep lines of time. After being fired, she had moved to a different neighborhood, working odd jobs to get by. She didn't use social media, and her old television was rarely turned on. One morning, her young neighbor knocked on the door, holding a tablet, her face beaming with excitement. "Miss Helen, you have to see this. Is this story about you?" Helen squinted at the screen. She saw a picture of a beautiful restaurant bearing her name. Then she read. She read about a young boy, about brown paper bags, about honey-glazed chicken, and about a successful man named Evan. Her hands began to tremble. The tablet nearly slipped from her grasp. Evan, that name, that little boy. Her old heart began to pound, stronger than it had in years. Could it really be him? The next day, Helen put on her finest sweater and took a bus downtown. She stood on the opposite side of the street, staring at the oak sign, "Helen's Table." Tears streamed down her face. She saw him through the glass window. He was no longer the gaunt, timid boy. He was a poised, confident man, leaning down to hand a plate of hot food to a child with the same warm smile she had tried to give all those years ago. Gathering all her strength, Helen pushed the door open, her body trembling. The clamor of the restaurant seemed to fall silent. Evan, as if on instinct, looked up. His gaze swept across the crowd and landed on the doorway. He froze. The woman with the snow-white hair, the kind eyes, and that trembling smile, there was no mistaking her. Time seemed to stand still. He slowly walked toward her, not with the air of a millionaire, but with that of a 7-year-old boy who had finally found his way home after being lost for years. He stood before her, his chest heaving with emotion. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he carefully pulled out his wallet. From a hidden compartment, he took out a worn, yellowed piece of paper, folded with care. He gently unfolded it, the creases deeply etched with the passage of time. Helen looked down. She recognized her own slanted handwriting. "I had an extra egg today. Make sure you eat it all, sweetie." "I always kept it," Evan said, his voice thick with emotion, "so I would never forget where my home was." She brought a trembling hand to her mouth, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Evan, is it really you?" Evan nodded, his own eyes welling up. He took her hand in his and said the words he had been preparing for 15 years. "You are my home, and this restaurant is yours forever." That reunion wasn't an ending, but the beginning of an even brighter chapter. Evan gave Helen the keys to the restaurant, but Helen, with the humility of a lifetime, didn't accept it as a property. She accepted it as a mission. She didn't sit in the luxurious manager's chair. The very next day, she was seen, her white hair tied back, rolling up her sleeves, putting on a white apron, and stepping into the very kitchen Evan had set aside just for her. For the first time in so many years, the kitchen had its soul back. One late afternoon, as the day's work wound down, Helen and Evan sat together on a wooden bench in front of the restaurant. They watched the well-fed children playing happily on the sidewalk, no longer bearing any trace of fear or hunger. "You see, Miss Helen," Evan said quietly, his voice filled with contemplation, 15 years ago, I thought I had to become rich to repay you, but I was wrong. All the money I ever made could never buy a single one of these children's smiles." He looked at her, his eyes overflowing with gratitude. "Your kindness was the real treasure. It doesn't need money or power. All it needs is a sincere heart and the will to persevere." Helen placed her warm, wrinkled hand over Evan's. "You've done so well, Evan. You didn't just repay me. You made that kindness grow and travel further than I ever could have dreamed." The image of the two of them, one old and one young, sitting together in the twilight before a restaurant named after kindness, became a symbol for the entire city. Behind them, Helen's table remained brightly lit, the sounds of laughter and conversation spilling out from within, carrying the warmth of humanity. And the story didn't end there. It continues to be written every day, in every meal that is served, in every life that is changed. Because a seed of kindness, once sown with sincerity, will never wither. It will grow, bear fruit, and cast new seeds into infinity.